Somewhere's down near the very end of that first trip with Enoch and Margie, there was a really eventful night. We played up in a town in Mississippi called Boonville. And we did a double bill with us and the Mahari family. Now, the Maharis, at the time, these guys were shit hot. They were Paul and Belinda, the husband and wife. Paul played rhythm guitar. Belinda sang harmonies. The oldest boy, Ricky, played the bass. Middle boy, Daniel, played mandolin and guitar. And the youngest brother, Chad, played the banjo. These kids were so good. They were just the best musicians I'd ever seen inside the bluegrass gospel realm. Like, these kids played their asses off. And you could tell, that they were studying, Tony Rice and Sam Bush and Bela Fleck. And the little boy, Chad, was one of the most amazing banjo players I'd ever seen. He could do anything, and their harmonies were incredible because they had a daughter. Her name was Christy. And she was a heavy girl. She was a big overweight girl, right? Which was a glandular problem. Apparently, she had surgery later in life that corrected the problem, and she lost all the weight. But she sang like an angel. Her voice was just absolutely unbelievable. And this band freaked me out. It made what we were doing, in the Sullivan family look a bit pale because, frankly, our music was old time. Even though it was hot, it carried well, but it was old time music. These guys were on the cutting edge of, modern bluegrass and modern ad-libbing and, just incredible band. So that was the first thing that night that happened that really came into play later on. And the next thing that happened was this little old man walked up to me. He was wearing a business suit, but the suit looked old, and it was shiny in places. Like, he was stooped over. He had a stooped over back, curved back, and his pants seemed to be up around his chest, and he had glasses and sort of salt and pepper hair combed over, and he looked very arthritic. He walked up to me and he said, "Son, you should think about coming to Northeast Mississippi Junior College." And I was like, I didn't even know what he was talking about. He said, "Listen, I'll pay your way if you want to come down here. Not only will I pay for your education at this college, I'll pay to send you to Ole Miss and get you a music degree. I'll pay for the whole thing. You're the most amazing musician I've ever seen." And I didn't know what to say. We had a brief conversation, and he explained to me that there were 3 colleges in the United States at that time, one in Texas and one in Tennessee, and this college in Boonville that offered this very unique curriculum, which was basically an American music history and folklore major. So, and he began to tell me the people that had gone through this course, this 2 years associate's degree, and some people had moved on to Middle Tennessee State University, which was one of the sister colleges in the program. And these people all went into jobs like at TNN, the national network, and they went on to perform. They went on to tour with this act and that act and whatever. And he said, "We've had a great success." And this was all true. he said, we've had a tremendous success rate, and we have a band at the college called Campus Country, where all of the majors play in the band. It's a 12-piece group, and blah. And he gave me this whole synopsis, kind of standing at the side of the stage after the show. And so I thanked him, profusely. And yes, sir, his name was Donald Franks. And he was a lawyer, and he was the lawyer in that town. He was one of the most powerful men in the whole county, and very wealthy. He had put a lot of his own money into, matter of fact, come to find out, he brought the curriculum to Northeast Mississippi Junior College. That's who started it and did it. It was him that brought this curriculum there. So there was 3 schools in North America that taught this course, this major. It was very involved. And so I left that conversation and just sort of went on with my life. And then, of course, as I was describing in the last episode, things went south a little bit, and I headed home and ended up working in Halifax. So at some point at that first trip back home, I came into possession. It must have been on my mind. I don't remember it being on my mind, thinking about going to college. It just wasn't. I wasn't sure of the value of it, because what I was interested in was playing music. But then I started to think about everything he was telling me. I think, what my opportunities might end up being if I was to go through this curriculum. And the other thing he promised me was, because I told him, I'm not here legally. I'm basically visiting. I have to leave the country every 6 months in order to remain legal. And he said, that's no problem, son. We can get you a collegiate visa to be here. Don't worry about that. We'll handle the whole thing. He said, I'll help you get a green card. And that was the thing, I think, that pushed me over the edge, is I thought, if I could get a green card, that would be incredible. I could go down there and live without worrying about, because immigration was a problem, right? You couldn't. Every time I crossed the U.S. border, I was lying, and I hated it. I didn't like telling those lies. They weren't serious, crime-breaking lies. But I was breaking the law by not telling them I was intending to stay there for 6 months, right? I would get across the border by telling them I was going to visit my Uncle Joe in Waltham, which I did, actually. Every time I passed through there, that's where we stopped first. But I wasn't telling them the truth, that I was down there working. It wasn't getting very much money. It wasn't like I was going down and taking somebody else's job, because there was nobody else who wanted to work these jobs for the little money I was making. And I just felt crappy about it. And I thought, and also my buddy Ray Legier, one of the greatest instrumentalists ever in the world, as I've said before in this series, he was down there working all the time. And at some point he won a green card in a lottery. And so I thought, man, if I could get legalized down there, there's the rest of my life. I can go down there and live the rest of my life, because I loved it that much. It was just a great place to be at that time. Things are a little more tense nowadays, but back then, man, it was a smoking spot to be, and especially for music. And again, now it's not. Now working in Nashville and these places is a nightmare if you actually try to play actual music. So anyhow, I went home, and this must have been on my mind, because at some point in time, I don't know when it happened or how, I can't remember what happened, but I came into possession of a grant application from the Canada Council. and it was for schooling. And so I filled this thing out. I remember doing it in Joe's room at the marina. Filled the thing out and mailed it off. And I never thought about it anymore because I did it half-heartedly. I never thought in a million years that anybody would give me anything. I just didn't occur to me. So I filled it out, mailed it off, and that was it. I just forgot all about it, really. So I started out that period. I got a job with Eagle Security in Halifax, and I worked for them for a little while, and I had lots of fun. It was wintertime, and I was always interested in law enforcement, so it was nothing for me. I wanted to be. If I hadn't been a musician, I'd have been a cop. I loved law enforcement. I loved the idea of looking after people, and so security. And Joe had been a security guard for several different companies and for a long time. He worked for Burns up in Ontario, and it was just a good job for me. I liked it. So I worked for them for a while, and remember being down at Carlson Shipyard in the middle of the winter in a guardhouse, and there was a space heater in there, and I went into the main building to use the bathroom, and when I came back, the guardhouse was on fire. And the space heater had caught the place on fire, so I managed to put it out, and so that was that. The boss came down, checked it all out, and figured I wasn't to blame, and so they moved me. They moved me to an old folks' home on Gottingen Street in Halifax, and I was the night watchman there. And that became, there was an incident there. A woman had fallen down in her apartment. Somebody came to my desk and said, I can't get into my mother's room. She's in there hollering, but we can't get the door because the chain's on the door. So here I go upstairs and kick this door in, which took a while because they were big, giant steel doors, and it had a security chain on it that was engaged. So it took a while. I was like hollering into her, don't be afraid. It's going to be really noisy. I got to kick the door down. And I was a big guy, but I wasn't as big as heavy like I am now, but I was a big lad. And I had muscles in my shit back then. And I kicked that, took about 10 minutes, kicked the door down. Finally, I never did break the chain. I just pulled the guts out of the wall, and I reached in and unscrewed the screws and the plate and got the door open and went in to save this poor old woman who fell down, broke her hip and all that. So that was fine. And then at some point in time, it was hard work. It was shift work. It was graveyard shift. One night I fell asleep in there, and the boss came in and caught me and fired me. So that was the end of that. But I still loved it. I still loved that work. I thought, geez, I should try to go somewhere else. So I went ahead and I applied to Burns Security, which is where Joe had worked. They were along the same lines as Brinks. They had armed service. They had all this different stuff, and I got on with them. They wanted to send me. Where did they want to send me? Bridgewater. So that's where I ended up going back to Bridgewater, and this is crazy, but I mean, what was going on in Bridgewater at that point was there was a big mall down there, and big for those times, and they were making it bigger. It was under construction. They were doing a complete refurbishment of the entire building. They were adding a huge piece. They were tearing everything out and it was a massive. It took 2 years or 3 years for them to finish it. And they were having a problem down there with, delinquents and idiots and drug dealers and fights. There was a major lounge inside the mall called Tomorrow's. And it was a rough place. Bridgewater, Lunenburg County in those days, man, you went to a fight and a dance broke out. That was how it was down there. And so I ended up going down there as the head guy. They gave me carte blanche and said, you do what you need to do if you need to hire more guards, hire them. And you get a relationship going with the police, and we want you to protect that property and to get rid of the element in there that's causing the problem, which were people that were dealing drugs, and there was even an arcade in there, a quarter arcade, right? All the idiots hung out in there and sold grass and hash and whatnot, and there was an organized crime element in that town at a certain level. It was really bizarre. It was a really bizarre time. And so here I was, basically dropped. It was just like something out of a friggin' Chuck Norris movie. Here I'm dropped into this meat grinder, trying to keep this place under control. And so it was really funny. And then, of course, some of the people that were in there doing this, shining their ass in this place, I went to school with them. I knew who they were. I knew them. And so I would walk up to them in a uniform and go, well, you boys, you got to move along and all this shit. And they'd be telling me to go screw myself. And so no wonder I didn't get killed. Nobody ever made a move on me. And most of them, after a while, I got the place under control. It stopped all the kids running around, taking up the benches from the old folks and the stupid rent-a-cop shit you do, right? But it wasn't easy, and I had no car. I must have walked 1,000,000 miles between the ages of 13 and 19. I had no car. I never did have a car until later on in this story, actually. I ended up hiring two of my buddies, and so there was a team of 3 guys in there, and it was really cool. I got paid well, and I made my own schedule. So I scheduled my 2 buddies and myself just what I wanted to work, and we got the place under control. And along about that time, something bizarre happened that's going to come into play quite a bit later on in the story. There was a girl I had gone to school with, and she was sort of a nondescript person. She kept to herself. She wasn't, everybody, I never heard anything bad about her. She was a nice girl, and she left me a note and a picture at the security desk. And I don't know where this came from, but she had been in the mall, apparently at some point in time, saw me in there and reached out to me to date me, wanted to go on a date. So I decided, what the hell? I wasn't attached. There was nothing going on. I had nothing else. I had time off, a little bit of time off the weekends, whatnot. So I decided to take her out. So we dated for a while, leading up to, I don't even know how to describe it. We dated. I met her family and her brothers and her mother and father, and they lived outside of town a ways, and we did what we could do, with me with no car and whatever. And so that was all going on. And then at some point, I don't know exactly what caused it, because I wish I could remember some of these finer details, but it's been so long ago that I decided at that point that it was probably because I was calling back down to Mississippi and probably talking to Donald Franks and certain things. And so that fall, when I was, that summer when I was 18 years, I would have been 19 then, I think. I would have been 19 in 1988. Yes, that sounds about right. So, I decided I was going to go down to school. I don't know exactly what precipitated it, but I decided I was going back down to school. And at the time, I was working also. I was also playing with Dave, as I said earlier in the last episode. And when I decided to go down to school, I was unsure of how to tell him that I was leaving. And the night I told him, I was in Halifax visiting Bob and Joe, and I was they were living upstairs in the marina, and so I remember Dave coming over for something, and I thought, well, now's as good a time as any to, tell him I'm going. The band is over, right? And so we went downstairs. He had heard. I think that's what actually happened. He heard I was leaving, and That's right, because he came to the top of the stairs, and he said, "I want to talk to you," and and he didn't look happy. And Dave was a really violent guy, as I've said before. And so Bob and Joe looked at me, and I thought, oh, great, I'm dead. So I went down the stairs with him, and he went out the door, and I stayed inside the building. He was just outside the door on the porch, and he goes, "So, you're screwing off on me?" And I said, "Well, I said I want to go to school." And he says, he put the whole guilt trip on me. I realized I spent thousands of dollars on a sound system and blah blah blah. And he was really pissed. And I said, I'm sorry. And I couldn't really get much out of my mouth. And he jumped me. He rushed me, and I immediately retreated. Inside the building, and there was a workbench there with all of his tools, because they were renovating the building at that time, and all of his tools were there. And he let a big bellow out of him. I'm gonna effing kill you. And he rushed me and pushed me back into the building. And I was trying to get away from him, and he never did get a hold of me, and I just went flying back against this bench. And there were saws and hammers and drills, and he saw that. And I had my hand on all this stuff. And he stopped up short at the door, and Bob and Joe came running down the stairs. And we're like, what the hell are you doing? And, of course, Dave's like, that little bastard's, screwing off and just leaving me. And he went, completely ape shit. And when he saw that Bob and Joe were there, he and me with my hand on every possible weapon I could find, he backed off. And he stormed out of the place. And scared the crap out of me. I thought he was going to kill me. I really did. He was a terrifying man when he was angry, and he got angry a lot. So that's, again, these things would happen to me in my life, and it just took me back to, it was just more and more violence and abuse heaped on me seemed to be from every corner. The only people that never, Bob and Joe never laid a finger on me, never were mad at me, never, ever. But Dave and Mother and, other people in my life, it was just nonstop, right? Horrible. So anyhow, at some point in time, I turned in my supervisor's tie, and I put my second command in charge, gave my notice. He took over. He did well with it for a while, I guess. I lost track of what was going on. And I said goodbye to that girl I was dating and thought, well, I'll just write her and whatnot. I had no plans for whatever. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I just was doing it, and that was it. So, and I don't even remember how I got down there. I know I had a lot of money in my pocket because I had worked and saved some money. So I think I flew part of the way and then took a bus to a town in Alabama that was just over the state line from Boonville, and someone came and picked me up. I think it was my friends, the Starlings. Don Starling and Shane Starling, they lived in Boonville. I met them through the Sullivan family. This was one of the, a group of people I met through billeting, because we used to stay at preachers' houses and congregants' houses and all this stuff, and the Starlings were just tremendously beautiful people. And I think they came and picked me up, and they took me to this college and dropped me off there, and it was a whole new culture shock. They put me in a dormitory right off the bat that was, and I noticed this immediately, and it was quite disturbing. It was a 3-floor dormitory, and I was in the middle floor, the second floor. The whole bottom floor was populated by black guys. They were on the bottom floor, and it was sort of the worst floor. And they were all football players and athletes, and the whole team was there on the one floor, and these guys were super nice guys, and they didn't know what to make of me. Here I was, this white kid, and didn't hold myself the same as the other white people. They were coming because, I mean, as sad as it is, racism and segregation was well alive there in northern Mississippi in 1988, 89. It was, and I could see it, and it was like, man, this sucks. I don't understand why this is happening. I thought we were beyond all of this, and so I got in the dorm and settled in, and I met my roommate, who was really funny. This guy was hilarious, and I went over and I met with my proctor, the guy who ran the dormitory. He was a nice old guy. And then I went over and met my advisor, the head of the department. Her name was Shirley Taylor. She was a great musician. She was a beautiful woman in her 40s. And her and I just took to each other. And just really, we just did. She was really funny. She was good-hearted. I was, didn't know where I was, and was unsure of what I was doing there, and it was a really mind-blowing experience to be just dropped into this situation. So she guided me through, matriculation and getting my books and all this stuff, and Donald Franks was supposed to be taking care of everything, so he indeed just kind of gave me vouchers for everything, and I became a college student. I went and got my books. I went and got registered with all my courses, and of course, I decided to minor in psychology. I found that incredibly fascinating, and so I had this music major, minor in psychology. I had a tremendously awesome psychology professor who never ever assigned really anything at all. He would just lecture for an hour, and it would seemingly be about nothing. It was a story from his own life, a real story from his own life, and by the end of the story, he had tied the whole thing perfectly to a chapter in the textbook. And that guy was unreal. He was the best teacher I've ever seen in my life. And he just completely instilled this huge love of the science of the mind for me. And I got hundreds in that class. I just excelled in it because it was so fascinating. Mostly because I think I was analyzing myself. I was starting to see how all of these things were playing in my own life. So, yeah, so it was awesome. And of course, then I met the band. All of my other classmates in this major, there was about 12 of us. And each person was either a vocalist, and I mean a good one. These kids weren't there to learn. They already knew how to do what they were doing. They wanted that diploma to go on to something bigger, either a bigger school with a music program or right into the industry workforce. And so there was a bunch of talented singers. There was a whole 7-piece band, bass, drums, electric lead guitar, Shirley on the piano, a couple of rhythm players, and then there was me. I became the utility man. I played fiddle, mandolin, dobro, guitar, banjo, and that's where a little bit of problem came in for me. The seeds of something rather unpleasant began to grow in me at the very beginning of this time in college, working in this big band with kids who had no experience in the outside world of music. They weren't touring musicians. Like, they had no history of being out earning a living playing music. None of them did. Many of them had never been in a studio. Probably none of them, for the most part. And something started to grow in me that was not pleasant. And I, of all the things in my life, this is my biggest regret, because it did a lot of damage over the years. And I don't even know how to explain it, really. And I don't want this to sound like I'm making excuses, because you always have a choice in your life how you're going to conduct yourself, and how you're going to relate to other people, and how you're going to treat other people. This is your choice. It's no one else's. No one can force you to be an asshole. It's a choice you make, right? So the thing that happened was I had learned how to play music in isolation. And I really hadn't come across any other musicians, except for people like Ray and Frank, who could get above me consistently. You know, I had not met many players that could do what I did. And even Ray and Frank couldn't do some of the things I was doing. Like, they were not, you wouldn't see Ray and Frank, either one, you know, they could play bluegrass all day long and old time music, but you'd never see them running through, you know, a Django Reinhardt solo, or playing Chet Atkins or Jerry Reed or any of these other things that I did, you know, all the time. And then when I started to play with other musicians, I was always looking at everybody going, man, these guys are good, but they're no challenge to me. And there's all kinds of things I would like to do, but I don't think they could do them with me. And at first it was just frustration. And then it became, when I started to realize, you know, I was told by the Sullivan family when I left the first time that hurt them. I was sorely missed by them. And then leaving Dave, he threatened to kill me. It was that bad. He didn't want to lose me in that band. And then I go into this campus country situation, the band at the college, and I look around, and I keep blowing their minds, like, because they're not used to seeing, like, for instance, we would learn popular music that was going on the radio, country radio, and we would play that stuff. We also did other things. We also did trad music as well, but I would, like, I would go and learn a fiddle part, like the fiddle part from Streets of Bakersfield, which is horrendously difficult. I would go next door in the next room with the recording and come back 10 minutes later playing the fiddle part just like the guy on the Dwight Yoakam record. And it would blow their minds. I remember several times, we'd play the tune for the first time and the band would fall apart when I did something, because it was just like the record, and everybody would just fall apart and look over at me and go, "What? Did you hear that? Sounds just like the album." And so I started to believe my own hype. I think that's the easiest way to describe it. Meanwhile, it was true. There was a huge chasm in ability between me and 95% of the people I met playing music. And the dark side of me latched onto that. I started to very gradually just kind of become an asshole. And the more that developed, the more I displayed it. It wasn't anything right off the bat. I didn't just decide one morning to get up and be an overbearing prick, but it started to develop in me at that time, and it manifested itself in some really ugly ways. I'll have to go into it in a later episode, but this is important because getting to that point where I my ego was taking over caused me to recognize it later on and get rid of it, because it's the worst, it's the most damaging thing that you can do as a musician and a performer is to think too much of yourself. I don't take myself seriously at all anymore. And especially now, because when you look at the situation now, sure, I can do all kinds of things. Whoopee whoop. Because the kids that are coming up now, I'm going to make an excuse for myself. They do have 10,000 times the amount of resources I had when I was learning. So the people that are out playing now, learning now in their 20s and even younger, these people are unbelievably talented, but they had resources. I didn't have YouTube. I didn't have tablature. I didn't have any of those things, right? I had to learn everything by ear, and that was the body part that made me a great player. Was my ear, not my hands or anything else. It was being able to hear something and be a human transcriber, tape recorder, and be able to play it back note for note correctly every time. That was my deal. And so the seeds of those problems, which thank God I don't think really lasted very long. Some people may say different, but the seeds of that phase of my life were born in that setting, in the college. And we'll get into that in the next episode. But one thing for certain, when I landed there and saw, this another side of American society, especially the deep South, and saw and met all these different people from different places all over the United States, and met all these great black folks that I met, that were everything from athletes to, you know, a cappella blues singers, and like you name it. Like, there was so many. The culture, the mixture of culture there was just unbelievable. It was unbelievable, the things that you could see and do going to that little college, with a couple thousand kids there. I decided at that point that I was going to be an American. It was just the way of life there was so, I don't know how to even describe it. It was laid back, but it tended to make you dream bigger. You know what I mean? That was the thing. This school was literally 20 miles from Tupelo, Mississippi, where Elvis Presley was born. That wasn't lost on me. I was down there. I was 20 miles from that guy's house, his home place. And the things that he did coming out of abject poverty, and the people that I started to meet through being there in that college, which incidentally, again, probably in the next episode, this is the place where I ended up at the Opry for the first time. And yeah, there was just so much going on there. I decided, I don't think I'm going to go home. I don't want to go home at this point. I need to stay here. This is where I belong. They're accepting me, even though they know I'm different. I don't hold some of their political views and societal views, but everybody I come in contact who has a negative political or societal view, I seem to change them for the better a little bit. And I was noticing that, I was running into people who were racist, and and not mean racists, just people that were born into it, didn't know any different, which happens all the time down there, right? I was presenting another way to look at things to a lot of these people, and they were like, "Yeah, man, you're right," and they would stop, saying, they wouldn't say the N-word around me, or anything like that. They would stop. And I loved that. I thought, Jesus, this is pretty damn cool. Like, I might be making a small difference in this little tiny pocket of people I'm in, and there was just so many things that made me decide that that's where I was going to hang my hat for the rest of my life. And I thought often about home, and obviously, because once you can take the Maritimes, the boy out of the Maritimes. You can't take the Maritimes out of the boy. And yeah, it's I thought about home a lot, but it was a nostalgia. It became a nostalgia at that point. I never really thought at that point in my life, in that first year in that college, that I would ever go home and live again. Something about that was sad, and something about that was happy. It's a very interesting dichotomy, I can tell you that. But, yep, Mississippi. A Nova Scotian in Mississippi.
The sun was setting in the west. The birds were singing on every tree. All nature seemed inclined for the rest, but still there was no rest for me. I grieve to leave my native land. I grieve to leave my comrades all, and my poor aged parents whom I love so dear, and the bonny, bonny lassie that I do adore. Farewell to Nova Scotia, the sea-bound coast. Let your mountains dark and dreary be. For when I am far away on the briny ocean tossed, will you ever heave a sigh or a wish for me? I have 3 brothers, they are at rest. Their hands are folded on their breast. But a poor simple sailor just like me must be tossed and driven on the deep blue sea. The drums do beat and the wars do alarm. The captain calls, I must obey. It's farewell, farewell to my Nova Scotia's charms. It's early in the morning, I am far, far away. Yeah. Farewell to Nova Scotia, the sea-bound coast. Let your mountains dark and dreary be. For when I am far away on the briny ocean tossed, will you ever heave a sigh or wish for me? Will you ever heave a sigh or